Thank you very much first for having me over and giving me this opportunity to present a part of my research. I must say that I also found the title, well, I would use the word intriguing. And the two phrases that really caught my attention was old anxieties and new expressions. My talk is going to focus on the role, on the transitioning role of the state in the information age. And when I'm talking about the state, I'm talking of the nation state and states in the hierarchy. And of course, this is the role of the state in the larger development discourse, the contemporary development discourse of the 21st century. I will first give a brief context and then focus on the transitioning role of the state. Through the case study, I will take the case study of a municipal reforms program that is currently being implemented at a statewide level in the state of Karnataka. The reforms are being implemented in 213 urban local bodies in a centralized fashion by the state of Karnataka, and the objective is to strengthen urban local bodies through administrative reforms. Okay, to give a brief context, the contemporary development discourse has been and continues to be articulated amidst certain conjectural openings, many of which have been acknowledged at the global level and are visible at the local level. The first pertains at a very broad level to the failure of the markets and the state, the failure of the state and the markets as modes of coordination to address development challenges. Also, the subsequent failure of public-private partnerships, which largely emerged from the acknowledgement that states and markets are not adversarial modes of coordination, rather they are complementary, and that gave rise to public-private partnerships many developing countries witnessed in the last 2 decades of the 20th century, continue to witness in the 21st century, but many of which have also not delivered on development agenda. At the same time, there has also been this emergence of contemporary globalization processes, largely triggered by ICTs, and in parallel, localization processes. So, when we look at these transitions that are happening both within the development discourse and in the context of development, on one hand, there is this demand for alternatives to the state and the markets as modes of coordination. And on the other hand, this whole advent of technology, ICTs, and contemporary globalization processes has made visible several supranational and subnational levels of state and non-state actors visible, and has also rendered them active in a space that was traditionally occupied by the welfare state. Now, what has happened as a result of these processes is that there has been this realization at a certain level that there is no single actor, private or public, that has the knowledge or the capacity to address development challenges unilaterally. And because of the emergence of these subnational and supranational actors and non-state actors, there has also been this call for collaborations between public, private, and civil society as a mode of governance. And these collaborations are emerging as organizational and institutional arrangements which are widely being acknowledged as modes of governance. And one form of such governance is the network form of governance. I am going to focus on the network form of governance. It is also in academic literature referred to as the heterarchy. Now, academic literature also says that the state is very central to these collaborations. And although it is just one node within a whole a range of nodes within the collaboration, it is central to the functioning of the collaboration. And for the state to be central to this collaboration, it needs to transition. It needs to transition from a command and control entity to one that is able to facilitate knowledge exchange, is able to facilitate dialogue, is able to facilitate collaboration between the various nodes of the network. So, having said that, what is interesting is the manner in which the state's centrality actually manifests in its day-to-day functioning. And that is what I'm going to throw light on with the case study that I'm going to look at. That is something also that literature is very silent on. Now, what is perhaps worth mentioning as far as the municipal reforms program is concerned is that the program has largely been conceived, designed, as well as implemented in a very centralized fashion. The approach that the state takes to implementing this program is what I call the centralized decentralization approach. That means the state is actually looking at all these e-governance interventions, using technology as a means to administrative reforms, but is doing it in a very centralized manner. Partly, this approach, I argue, emerges from the realm of technology, given the premise that technology allows for standardization of processes at scale. However, more importantly, this approach derives from the historical evolution of the nature, structure, and functioning of the state. Now, while I'm going to be speaking about the Indian state, a lot of this is true to many developing country post-colonial states. The Indian state has emerged from independence as a strong, centralized two-tier state. While the state did embrace decentralization as late as 1990s to transition to a three-tier state, the need for a strengthened third tier of governance, which is the local governance, is really what I call the old anxiety, because I will not get into the details, but historically we have always been speaking about how a third tier of governance has to be strengthened. Using ICTs to achieve this objective, that is strengthening the local government, constitutes the new expression. Yet how this new expression is going to manifest empirically is something that has not been addressed in academia, and empirically something that needs to be qualified. The experience of the municipal reforms program in Karnataka provides some pointers to what these manifestation looks like at the grassroots level. In the municipal reforms program, the state centrality, the state as a central node within the network does manifest both as a participant node and as a lead node. As a participant node, the state facilitated and steered the performance and functioning of all the nodes or partners of the hierarchy in line with the agreed upon objectives, and that is of strengthening the local governments. However, the state does lapse back to functioning as a lead node, where it peripheralizes all the other nodes within the network. In doing so, the approach of the state also transitions, where it begins to look at technology as the end rather than the means to an end. And this transition in the approach of the state has produced outcomes that are contrary to what was anticipated or envisioned. Now, I did look at some of these reforms and how these are being implemented and what are the outcomes of these reforms at the local body level. And I found that in many cases, the reforms, the administration of these reforms using technology has led to weakening the existing state citizen accountability mechanisms while jeopardizing the envisaged ones. In addition, we also found that there is very little ownership of these reforms at the local level. These outcomes are a consequence of the manner in which the state is mediating technology enactment at the local level by the urban local bodies. Technology enactment, to begin with, has excluded elected representatives, and mind you, in reforms that are political in nature. I looked at two reforms. One was looking at efficient service delivery, and the other was looking at enhancing the revenue of the urban local bodies. While the former is the path to garner votes in the long run, enhancing taxes and collecting taxes is something which is politically unpopular. Yet I did find that the tax reform was much more successful than the service delivery reform, but I will not get into the details of that, and we can have a discussion on that later. What I also found is that one was that the state is mediating technology to the exclusion of the elected representatives. Secondly, it is also mediating technology enactment at a stage within the workflow process that helps it to discharge its own functions rather than benefiting the citizen. Therefore, the whole question of who benefits from the administrative reforms and the introduction of technology, from what lens do we look at these, the outcomes of these reforms, who benefits at and what level, becomes crucial. Consequently, the reforms continue to be the baby of the state. Inclusion through participation in empowerment remain buzzwords with little achieved. There is more centralization than decentralization. Of course, the whole intervention has produced certain systemic changes within the structure of the state, and these are positive changes. We have acquired skills like the IT skills. The state has introduced these skills within its structure, and it has created a permanent human resource pool as well as an infrastructure base, but so far it has not been able to capitalize on these. More importantly, the presence of technology has created the awareness for the potential that technology offers in achieving administrative reforms. This is evident in many ways. When I visited some of these local bodies, many of them are innovating at their own level, coming out with technological tools which are serving their purpose rather than what the state at a central level is saying. So the point that I'm making here is that while the state did function for a short while during the reforms program as a participant node, it lapsed to functioning as a hierarchy. The transition was a temporary one linked to various factors, and the fact that the state ultimately emerged as a lead node, while symptomatic of the state's strong centralized and hierarchical roots, also points to limits of network governance. This then informs the question on whether these modes of coordination are really alternatives to the state and the market mode of coordination in addressing development challenges, and also, more important, the question whether the multi-stakeholder governance model is an effective one to address development challenges. I will just take a minute to kind of conclude by pointing out two research agendas which I think are important. In my own research, I show how the centrality of the state actually manifests both as a participant node and a lead node. There may be various ways in which this centrality manifests. So to that extent, my research is limited. There are in the development context, for example, I think Shumandro speaks about, when he speaks about the Aadhaar model, the organizational, institutional arrangements that particular model relies upon is also very vast in itself. And where does the state sit within that framework of organizational and institutional arrangement that it is deployed, and where do state citizen accountability mechanisms actually sit within that arrangement is a question that needs to be taken further. The state need not be a participant or a network or a lead node. It can outsource the entire management of the network to another node, which is not a non-state actor. In that context, where do the state citizen accountability mechanisms sit? Another research agenda that I think is that, which is very relevant today, is that while the experience of the municipal reforms program points to the potentials and limits of network forms of governance, just like the markets in the states have failed, I think we need to start a dialogue on what are the points along which network forms of governance can fail. There have been attempts to thematize and theorize network failure. Network forms of governance are also prone to failures like the state and the markets. Insight into why and under what conditions hierarchies which are largely relying on ICTs fail can provide an insight to the complementarity of markets, hierarchies and hierarchies as modes of coordination to address development challenges. Thank you.